Hello and welcome to History Through Fiction, the podcast. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Katherine Scott Crawford, author of The Miniaturist Assistant. Katherine, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, let's start out with Gamble Vance. Who is she? What is her job? Tell us a little bit about this character.
Yeah, so Gamble Vance is a recently divorced art conservator in Charleston, South Carolina. She works at a museum called the Gilliard Museum of Art, and she restores tiny miniature portraits. So think of almost like little cameo, tiny miniature portraits that have been popular for thousands of years, but really in the 1700s and 1800s, they were sort of like our modern version of a selfie or a school portrait or something you would show off to people or carry with you. So Gamble is kind of this irrepressible character. She's a historian, an art historian, and she lives in a kitchen house in historic Charleston. So in Charleston, the city is very old and very well preserved. And kitchen houses were houses that sat back from bigger main houses. And of course, housed kitchens. They housed enslaved and indentured servants. You had to build a kitchen house so that the rest of the house wouldn't catch on fire if there was a huge fire. So in 2004, which is when Gamble lives in Charleston, she lives in a kitchen house. She has a black lab named Kipling, and is just kind of this really unique character, I like to think.
I'm curious to know a little bit more about restoring these miniature portraits. What exactly does that entail? Is that a real job? I'm just curious about it.
It is a real job, and I was so lucky. And I know you were mentioned asking me about my research, but I got to interview the United States' foremost expert on miniature portraits, a woman named Carol Aiken, who worked for a museum in Charleston that I based the museum where Gamble works on. And so it's a real job. It's a job. An art conservationist or an art restorer is a real job, and Gamble specializes in these portraits. And they are tiny, so they are just, make an inch to 3 inches at most tall, usually oval. They were painted on all kinds of things way back, but were painted on ivory from really the 1700s up through even now. Although I doubt they're on ivory now. But so the way that portraitists painted these is they used these tiny, tiny brushes, and they made these absolute tiny strokes. So when an art conservator goes back and conserves them, they have to use science and microscopes and tools and be very, very careful not to harm the painting itself.
That's incredible. I can't imagine just how intricate the detail is to do that. Well, let's talk about your other one of your other main characters here, Daniel Pettigrew. Where is he? When is he? Tell us a little bit about him.
Daniel Pettigrew lives and works in Charleston, but in 1804 in Charleston, South Carolina. And Daniel is an artist. He is the portraitist. So he is the one who creates and paints these miniature portraits. He's based on a real historical figure, a man named Charles Fraser, who was a prolific painter and miniature portraitist in late 1700s, 1800s Charleston. And Daniel runs this rather bohemian household. He has a much younger sister named Honor, who's 19, was 19. He was 19 when she was born, who he raised after his parents passed away. A free Black family, the Perrineaus, live with Daniel, and Honor. And Daniel is very much a focused artist, and in a lot of ways a man of his time, but that's another tricky topic because Charleston in 1804 actually is not like we would necessarily think that Charleston in 1804 would be like from what some of us learned in school. So,
Well, tell us what was it actually like? What did you learn in your research, and What is it that you wanted to convey to readers about the reality of Charleston at that time?
Yeah. So Charleston in the early 1800s, well, 1700s and up through the early 1800s, so before 1825, really, um, was this, it was this incredibly diverse port city. And one of the most important port cities in British America and then the early United States. And I had a college professor tell me once that you could stand on a street corner in Charleston in the late 1700s and early 1800s and hear six different languages being spoken. So it was the one of the art centers of the early colonies. In fact, the United States' first miniature portraitist lived and worked in Charleston. So Charleston also, and I will not. My husband says that sometimes I become Professor Crawford, so I will try not to become Professor Crawford right now. But for all of its the things we know about Charleston, the horrible history of enslavement, the brutality of enslavement, one of the really unique things about this time period, 1804, 1805, when the novelist set, is that there were more women-owned businesses and free people of color who owned businesses and who lived and worked in Charleston at that time than there would be 20 years in the future by the 1820s. And this is, it's very complicated, and it's all because of the slave trade and what happened with the laws of the slave trade. And after that time, Charleston and South Carolina became more closed and more insulated. And of course, that was all because of. But at this time, as a novelist, there are places to play with how people interacted. And inside a house, especially in the antebellum period, inside a house is always different than outside a house. Although this is technically the post-revolutionary period in Charleston. So I always tell people to think about, it's like our version of Regency, but in the
Sure.
United States.
So we've talked about the characters and the setting here, but what's the actual dilemma? What happens to Gamble and what propels the story forward?
So Gamble is recently divorced to kind of this typical Charleston guy, an old Charleston guy. So think of a family that's been somewhere for generations. Um, and she is kind of she's struggling with that a little bit and getting over that, but she is devoted to her job. And every night she walks home from the museum, from the Gilliard Museum, and she cuts through this alley called Stoll's Alley. And that's a real alley in Charleston. And the alleys in Charleston are the oldest thoroughfares in the city. Many of them are from the late 1600s. They are atmospheric and magical. And Stoll's Alley is one of those alleys. It's south of Broad in Charleston. So it's south of, in the Church Street section of Charleston, which is the oldest part of the city. And so Gamble walks home because she loves to walk. And one night she's in the alley, and at the long end of the alley starts out wide on one end, and it tapers down to about 5 feet across. It's lined with this ancient brick, pre-Revolutionary War houses. I mean, it's incredible. And so Gamble's walking down that alley in the dark after work, and she looks up and she sees a girl. And the girl is wearing early 1800s dress. So kind of think Jane Austen era dress. And the girl turns to Gamble and she says, "Come back," and then is gone. So now Gamble is starting to have what she thinks could possibly be memories returning to her. And she works with these miniature portraits. And this one miniature portrait in particular starts to kind of obsess her. And it's from a woman who she is convinced is the girl in the alley, just older. And so she tries to put the puzzle pieces together, and she can't get it out of her head as she's working with these miniatures. And she's also trying to figure out who painted the miniatures, because miniature portraits were so small, the artist often didn't sign them in any way. And so art conservationists and historians have to do a lot of research to figure out who painted these portraits. They have to look at the style of the portrait. They have to look at the choices that the artist made, the way they paint the faces, which is very different. So Gamble enlists her best friend, a man named Tolliver Jackson. And Tolliver is a Black man who is the director of the Cox Center for African American Research and Studies. He's a scholar and he's her best friend. And the Cox is actually based on the Avery Center, which is a real center in Charleston. And I just like to change names so I don't get into trouble, you know. But and they sort of go on this scavenger hunt across Charleston and across the state in some ways to try to figure out who the woman is in these miniatures, who painted them, and why does she seem to be talking to Gamble from the past.
Well, it's just such a fantastic, very like immersive kind of edge of your seat. Everything that goes together with this narrative sounds amazing. And I guess readers agree because you recently won an award for the novel, the Sir Walter Raleigh Award for Fiction. Tell me what that felt like, and what your if it like just the excitement of it. Tell me about that.
Oh my gosh. I'm still in a little bit of shock. I'm so honored. So the state of North Carolina does North Carolina Book Awards every year, and the Sir Walter Raleigh is the state's highest award in fiction and original fiction. And I got the notice that, you know, I was told that I won, and the ceremony is actually this Friday in Raleigh, North Carolina. And it's at the North Carolina Literary and Historical Association. So I, you know, authors that have won it in the past have been people like, I think David Joy won it last year, and Ron Rash and Lee Smith and Alan Gurganus and all these incredible North Carolina writers. So I am really just kind of still a little bit in awe, and I'm really thrilled to have won it. It makes me feel really, really good.
So when you're sitting at your writer's desk a year, 2 years ago, working through this and drafting it and revising it, did you ever imagine it would receive such an honor?
No, not at all. In fact, I wrote this novel differently than I had written my first novel and tried to write other novels. I kind of let myself be a lot freer with this novel, and I had a lot of fun with it. And so, though I, of course, thought about publication and wanted it to be published, and as I was writing, actually had some feelings which are rare of that, oh, I think this is going to be published. You know, I actually think I felt that way. I didn't really think about how other people would perceive it. And I know that sounds wild, but I don't write like that because it would stymie me so much. Like I can't even think about readers. I only think about the story and how immersed I am in it, you know.
Well, let's talk about your background a little bit. You already said you don't want to slip into your professor voice, and your bio says you're a recovering academic. Tell us a little bit about your academic background and why you say you're recovering.
Oh, yes. So I have a Master of Arts in English, and I actually earned that from the College of Charleston and the Citadel, which is kind of like the State Military Academy of South Carolina. It was a joint program. So I lived and worked in Charleston, and I have family from Charleston, and that's another story, but huge ancestry down there. But so I earned a Master of Arts in English because I thought I was going to be a college professor. And then after I did that, I knew I just wanted to write. And so I was a newspaper reporter, and then went back to school then I taught. I'm sorry. I've had lots of jobs. I'm like the girl with all the jobs. But so I taught as an adjunct English professor for 13, 14 years. I taught literature. I taught all kinds of literature classes. I taught writing. I did all of that, and went back and got my MFA from the Vermont College of Fine Arts, a Master of Fine Arts in Writing. and was still teaching. And the thing I loved about teaching were the kids. And I call them kids, even though they were grown-ups, but they were, the college kids. Um, I absolutely loved being and working with them. What I did not love, probably because I have a fairly typical artist personality, is I did not love um, all the nuts and bolts and the things that kind of stymie you in an academic life. So I wanted to write what I wanted to write and publish what I wanted to publish, and got a little bit worn out with the hoops that sometimes you have to jump through in academia to do those things. And also, it's not college professoring's fault. I am a all or nothing personality. So when I'm a college professor, when I'm a backpacking guide, or whatever job I've had, I don't know how not to be all that, And so when I was teaching, I wasn't writing at the same time. I had a newspaper column that I wrote for years, and that I could do, but I wasn't writing another novel. So really, it's more my fault than the career itself, that if I knew I wanted to write, and I knew I had to make a choice at some point, that I couldn't be, even though I was an adjunct, I was teaching multiple classes, as many adjuncts do. And so it was like a full-time job for me. And I stepped back from it so that I could write and finish another novel.
Well, my background's a little bit similar. I have a Master of Arts in History, and I'm kind of a recovering historian, and I ended up
Mhm.
going back to school for an MFA as well. And it's just been a decade of trying to overcome the stubbornness of history in order to write and publish fiction. And also, you went to Vermont College of Fine Arts. I spent a winter in Vermont at a ski resort. I worked at a ski resort. But tell me about your experience there, and maybe how that led to the writers' retreat that you do.
Mhm. Um, I First of all, I will have to talk about that sometime, because that was one of my dreams, was working at a ski resort that was one of my lives that never happened. But I loved being in Vermont and being at the Vermont College of Fine Arts. I had done a residency at the Vermont Studio Center years before, and just fell in love with Vermont. And I love snow, which, with this accent, it seems crazy that I love snow, but I love snow. So I spent 3 years there because I knew I wanted to get my MFA, because I thought I had to have it to teach full time, to find a tenure track professor job, which I'm not really looking for anymore. Although if somebody wants to give me one, great. But um, so I decided to get my MFA. I had a 2-year-old, and then I got pregnant with my second daughter during the program. So I loved Vermont. I loved Vermont College. The professors there are all publishing writers and authors, and I had some incredible mentors there who were. Sometimes it's difficult to find, and you'll know this too, of course, an author and a writer who's also an incredible teacher, and that's a difficult balance. And I had some absolutely wonderful mentors and professors who were also publishing writers. So I loved my experience there. I have still am close with friends from that program, and I really did thoroughly enjoy it. Yeah. Although by the end, I was very pregnant and I was trying to graduate. So it was a little different than a lot of people's experiences, I would think.
Well, and did that inspire your mountaintop writers retreat? And do you consider yourself a good teacher and a good writer? How do you do that?
Oh, I should have never said that. So the mountaintop writers retreats that I run are here where I live, which is in the mountains of Western North Carolina, and they're at a remote mountain lodge, which is run by wonderful folks. I don't own it or have anything to do with that part. I just host the retreats there and host retreats for them. And I Vermont, of everything inspires everything, I think. It's all the trickles from different rivulets and different sources, but I knew because of that having such a good experience with these author writers, teacher writers in Vermont, I wanted to try to provide that for somebody else. But also, I am an outdoor nut, and I was a backpacking guide and a camp counselor for years. And I love being out in nature, being away, being fairly remote. And I know that for a lot of us, to be able to write and to be able to reach the place where we can start putting our thoughts down onto the page, we have to sometimes leave our regular worlds behind in a way where we can kind of give over to that, give over to that creative impulse. And so I know I have to have that. So I try to run different types of retreats, but the ones that are really happening now are really just giving writers and creatives time and space in which to write. And I sort of become I make myself available, and so I become kind of like a listening ear to bounce ideas off, to brainstorm, to answer questions in any way I can with my experience. And just to sit around fires with writers and drink wine and and hang out and talk about this crazy life that we've all chosen or maybe wanting to choose.
I think that's fantastic to provide that space. I've never really had the advantage of just going away to work on my writing, but I can definitely relate to the going away part and the hiking, backpacking. In your bio, you wrote a necessary as air need to be alone. So I actually, in 2014, I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail. Yeah.
That's so cool.
And I love hiking out where you are as well. I've been to Smoky Mountain National Park, and as I told pre-interview, my sister lives in Roanoke and gone along the Appalachian Trail there and everything. Um, I guess I don't really know where I was going with that, but I was just that I can really relate to that.
Yeah.
It's nice to just get away for a while. Oh,
Well,
and
because I write when I'm hiking. So
mhm.
I'll go out. My perfect day is I take my kids to school with my dog in the car, and then we go, and I have a spot that's kind of along the French Broad River, which is the third oldest river and one of, I think, in the world, if not the United States, definitely United States. And we're out. And so that is work for me too, though, because I clear my head. I'm out with my dog. I can't handle folks who listen to music in the forest. It makes me crazy. But so I don't do any of that. I just think. And so then when I get back to my desk, I consider that I have been working since I've been out on the trail. So does that help you?
That definitely is a challenge to clear your head. A lot of times, it just if I'm not listening to music, a chorus of a song will be playing over in my head. But that does make a lot of sense. Um, for me, it gives me energy as an introvert to get away from people for a little bit. Um, yeah, I read that or maybe it was in an interview, you and Merlin go out on hikes every
Yes.
morning.
Uh-huh. That's my dog Merlin. I have a lab named Merlin, and she's my trail dog and my buddy. And we try to get out most weekday mornings. I have a 12-year-old daughter and a 16-year-old daughter, and a husband. And so life gets busy, before and after school and on weekends, but that's what we really try to do. And I had a lab before Merlin, who was with me as a backpacking guide, and who actually tried so hard. I taught these environmental literature and hiking classes where I tried to meld the two, and I would take people on hikes, and we would take breaks and talk about different things we were reading and different themes and environmental lit. And my dog would circle around and make sure everybody was you know safe and coming up behind. And
I was actually thinking about something like that. As I told you also in our pre-interview, I'm publishing a book, Jungle of Ashes, it's called. It's about Fordlandia and the failed rubber plantation in the Amazon. And the author Bryn Baranow and I were talking about. There's a lot of environmental issues involved in that book, and doing some kind of environmental slash writing retreat. I don't know what that would look like, but
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think that would be fabulous. And I think there's a lot of folks who would love that too. Um, I'd sign up for it.
and then the last thing that really struck me, you talk about your 1993 Isuzu Trooper. I had a
Oh,
1993 Jeep Cherokee, and
yes.
I loved that car. If I could have that again, I would.
Oh, actually saw an Isuzu Trooper. It had to be it's 90s for sure on our big road trip back from our Thanksgiving trip just 2 days ago. I every Isuzu Trooper that I see. There's one in my town where I actually approached the woman outside of a CVS to ask her if she was willing to sell, and she was not. She was like, even though it's leaking and all these things, she's like, I just can't. I
Yeah,
had a 1993 Isuzu Trooper, and his name was Macduff, from Macbeth, and we had a lot of adventures.
that's great. Well, before we wrap things up, let's return to the miniaturist assistant. Um, I know how important it is to you to transport readers into a historical time and place. Talk about the value of doing that and what readers can get out of visiting the past by reading your novel.
Oh, it's a great question. Um, Honestly, I think the first value of reading transporting fiction, mine hopefully included, is to give somebody an experience out of their own, to take them from the everyday and to widen their experience of life. And I know that sounds a little woo woo, but I I don't know if I'm a typical Southerner in this way, but I think the past is always present. And I think that if we don't learn from the past, then we are doomed to repeat it at our peril, which we do all the time. I mean, that's obvious, that we do that all the time. But I think what I hope, particularly with the miniaturist assistant, that readers will see is that even though they're in 1804, in this place, that we're not that all that different than we were then, and that our stories are all shared. And so, what I know from being a massive history dork in my research is that people in 1804 Charleston wanted the same things we want today. They wanted to be safe, they wanted to be loved, they wanted to find some success, and however they deemed success. They had the same familial problems, friendship woes, um, that we do now, um, and that they weren't all so different. Um, I I also really, really would love the dorky professor side of me. Would love for people to maybe be able to see from this experience in the past, from being in 1804 Charleston with Gamble and Daniel, and running around 2004 Charleston with Tolliver and Gamble and Kipling the dog, that maybe that we're given some hints into why we do things we do now, even if it's as simple as the food we eat or the vernacular we use, all the way to big important things like our politics and the way we interact with big issues in this country, um, while they are having like an escapist fun time in the past. That's my greatest wish.
Yeah, well said. And I think that you can definitely draw a line, from those events to today, and I think that will really expand readers' understanding while also giving them some fun to read.
That's my hope for sure.
Well, Catherine, thanks for joining me. Congratulations on the award. I hope you have a blast at the award ceremony.
Thank you.
And thanks again for joining me and talking about the miniaturist assistant.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was fun.